welcome to your Pelvic Health Podcast. My name is Susan Winograd, owner and founder of Pelvicore Rehab, and I am thrilled to be your guest today. I am really excited about today's episode for so many reasons. We are going to be talking about infertility today. We're going to have a really candid conversation. I think one that needs to happen more often than it does. And hopefully this will facilitate and start a good conversation with many, many people after they listen to this. Just some infertility facts. When I was thinking about whether I should give stats on infertility, I kind of paused because one of my big things that I always talk about is not catastrophizing. So I didn't want to bring these stats on and seem like I am catastrophizing and making things seem, catastrophic. And then I kind of flipped the story in my head as I was thinking about it. And I'm like, but you know what? A lot of people that struggle with infertility feel very alone. And I felt like the stats that I am about to tell you are meant not to be catastrophizing, but to show all of you out there that you're not alone. And in fact, the stats show that 1 in 8 couples, or 12 to 15% of couples, struggle with infertility, and about 7 million Americans struggle with infertility, and that the overall success rate of IVF falls between 25 to 30% for most intended parents. And the probability tends to increase as time goes on. So you're not alone. And I am so excited to introduce my amazing guest, Kathryn Bregman, owner and founder of Badass Fertility. She is a badass. She also happens to be a previous client of mine and has become a dear friend. Hi, Kathryn.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to be on this show today. Excuse me. I just am so excited to be here because the power of mindset combined with pelvic health healing. I mean, the work that we did together, the discoveries that you helped me make that ultimately wound up in me having my miracle baby at 40 were just, truly life-changing. Yeah. So it's really an honor and just incredible that we're sitting here together.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. How old is Maya now, your daughter?
She's 3.
She's 3. Yeah. So Kathryn and I worked together years ago, 4 years ago, I guess it was. Yeah. And she has sent me a Christmas card every year since, and with a picture of her daughter on it. And there are just, again, some clients that you forge a bond with and you know that you're going to be in touch with them forever. And I thank you for not only coming on as a mindset fertility coach, but also as a previous client willing to share their story. Because I think that we were talking about this outside, Kathryn, that I think that is the most valuable thing that people will come out of today, because I'm a physical therapist. And I did share with you that I did have some fertility struggles of my own. In retrospect, my struggles, I got off lucky. I ended up starting the process, and then I had a miscarriage, which somehow stimulated a healthy pregnancy. But it was very stressful and painful at the time. And for you to come on and be willing to share your story is amazing, because I can give people information. But people can get information from other places, right? Yeah. I might be able to offer information that they've never heard before, or something that might inspire them, but I can't offer a relatable story like you can. And I think that the story that you'll share really gives people hope. It gives people the opportunity, if you will, to change their mindset. So Can you share your story with us, Kathryn? It's so profound, and I would love for you to share it with our listeners.
Absolutely. I would be happy to share it. So I married my husband when I was 36. And I remember at the time when we got married, and I promise I won't go through all the details, but I'll give you like the overview here.
Happy to be here all day.
Okay. But I remember at the time thinking I already felt behind. Right? Because somewhere in our culture and our society, we have this idea that like 35 is somehow this benchmark for healthy pregnancy.
Well, do you think it has anything to do with the fact that after that they call it a geriatric pregnancy?
It might be somewhat related to the fact that that's what they do. It's insane. I mean, not only that, but because the women I work with and myself personally, I know several women and former clients who have become pregnant naturally into their 40s.
Yeah.
Having healthy babies. And when you really look at the statistics and the numbers, you start to find that the differences between pregnancy outcomes at 35 and 40 are actually not nearly as dramatically different as we are sort of
trained to think.
Exactly. So I was really in that state of mind, right? Already from out the gate. I thought, oh my God, I'm behind. I've got to get on this. So there was a level of stress for me going into it right from the get-go.
So interesting.
Yeah. Especially as I started to learn more and more about mindset and the way that it can affect, your outcomes in all aspects of life, but specifically in pregnancy, we're talking today.
Yeah.
So I was nervous about it at the outset, but interestingly enough, the first month of trying, when we used an ovulation kit, I did become pregnant. And I thought to myself, very ironically, well, why do people struggle to get pregnant? I mean, all you have to do is use an ovulation kit, right? And like famous last words. I lost that pregnancy early on, maybe 6 or 7 weeks into it. But it was devastating nonetheless. And after that, I did not become pregnant again for 3 years.
Okay.
And I believe if I had not discovered the power of mindset, I might still be trying to get pregnant.
Wow, that's so profound. Can you tell us a little bit about what you went through and your journey in those 3 years?
Absolutely.
I think that would really help people as well.
Yeah. So starting out, I was already, a fan of acupuncture. I already was interested in that as a healing modality. So that was the first place that I turned. And in terms of my emotional state, I will say I felt very anxious. I felt very alone. A lot of people were telling me, just relax, just, calm down. You're going to get pregnant, no problem. But there was something in me that felt like there was some stone that needed to be turned. There was something off and I didn't know what it was. And I was very determined to try to find it. So I started with the acupuncture route, and that turned into doing acupuncture about ultimately twice a week for almost a year. Mm-hmm. And, trying every month still and making some minor dietary changes, reducing any caffeine intake, trying to emphasize certain foods in my diet. And really just hoping that would help my body kind of align itself in the way that it needed to so that I could become pregnant. After about a year of doing that, I was also taking some supplements and herbs. After about a year of doing all of that, I still wasn't pregnant. And so my acupuncturist actually recommended, especially at that point, I was about probably 37, 38, right? And she said, I think you should see an IVF doctor. Mm-hmm. So I went to an IVF doctor and got a workup there. And they found a number of things that they thought were off. In particular, one of the things that proved to be the most significant was really that my fallopian tubes were what my doctor called kinky. And so what that actually means is that there was endometrial tissue that had bound itself. And sorry if this is too much information.
No,
but
this is great. This is great.
So there was endometrial tissue that had bound itself around my tubes, making it harder for the sperm and the egg to meet and to ultimately get to the uterus. So even if they could meet, then I was actually told that the chances of my having an ectopic pregnancy were higher because it would be harder, again, for that joined egg and sperm to make it safely into the uterus, and they might instead implant in the fallopian tube. So that was scary.
That's quite a lot to absorb.
It was a lot
from
to
a doctor.
absorb.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so much, and it's, the waiting rooms of IVF clinics, for anyone who has found themselves there, we all know it's like every woman there is dealing with the most painful process likely of her life. Yeah. And yet we're all kind of operating in these silos where we don't come together.
Yeah, that's so profound.
The whole time I was there, I kept thinking like, why don't we talk? Why don't we have a way of like connecting? Because we know that we're all really in the same boat in one way or another. We're all suffering. And for me, a lot of my friends, I didn't have any friends who struggled to get pregnant. My friends either got pregnant accidentally, right. Sure. That I know of. Cause plenty of people do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if I expanded my scope, right, I would find plenty of people. That's a really good point.
Well, I don't think that I've ever publicly said that I struggled with infertility for 2 years,
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if my sisters know. And I feel like it's now at this point in my life, it's not because I'm being private about it. It's just, it was a different part of my life. But at that point in my life, I was way too private about it. And it became very isolating, and much more painful than it had to be. I'm so curious, Kathryn, when it's so interesting, this vision conjured up in my mind of you sitting in the reproductive endocrinologist's office with women. And I see these sort of like imagining these heavy looks in their eyes, but no one making eye contact.
Absolutely.
That's like the image that's conjured up in my mind. And in my mind, I so badly want to sort of say, let's create a support group right here, right now, in this waiting room. Did anybody at that point say, join a support group? There are other alternatives other than IVF. Was that offered to you at all?
Not at that point in time. I didn't know anything about support groups when I started down the IVF path. I was, even though I had been struggling for a year, and felt that I was doing, my research, even if you just kind of Google things, right? What I was Googling was how to, support fertility, or how to what are the odds of IVF working, right? What are the odds of getting pregnant without IVF? There were a lot of different things, but it was at that point in time, beyond my thinking wow, why aren't we all talking? It was off my radar. Later on, towards the end of my journey, I did start to become aware of a support group that was out there. But I will say this, that one thing I caution people about a lot, ironically, speaking about community, is you have to be really intentional about the community you choose to join. Because at the time I was spending, now that I recall, a fair amount of time in chat rooms.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And you have got to be careful about those chat rooms, because they can become places of not only misinformation,
but catastrophization.
Catastrophizing. Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, I am a mindset expert. That's what I do, because I know that shifting my perception of my experience, right, from one of fear to one that ultimately resulted in confidence, was the key turning point in every action that I took in getting me to my baby.
Yeah.
So I don't want to surround myself with people who are focused on what's going wrong or what could be going wrong. I want to surround myself with people who are focusing on what could be right and what is going right. And not out of a false hope, not out of being fake or super cheery when it's really a hard thing, not to, whitewash pain.
You're not sugarcoating it.
Not to sugarcoat it, but to get really real. About the reality that there's a lot of hope.
Yes. Even with pelvic pain, there are an endless amount of Facebook groups and chat rooms, and I beseech my clients not to go into them. And I say there are positive, constructive forums out there, and I will direct you to the right one, but please do not go on these catastrophizing groups, because it won't help you and it will hurt you.
It will drag you down.
It will drag you down. Mm-hmm. I think that's why what you do is so important. And I'm going to keep quiet for a minute and let you continue your story.
Okay.
Because we're getting up to the point where you decide to become a fertility mindset coach. So you take it away, my friend. Okay. Keep going. This is fascinating.
So I'll keep moving here. So we start to do the IVF. We did 2 rounds of egg retrievals. And ultimately from each of those, we had no genetically normal eggs. And that was devastating. At that point in time, I had started to realize that I needed to work on my mindset.
Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
So the kind of, and this is just a curiosity question that's coming up for me here, is that the kind of infertility that you mentioned you have is what we call mechanical infertility. You had endometrial tissue. It could be endometrial tissue. It could be scar tissue that mechanically blocks the sperm from meeting the egg. Mm-hmm. And that's when a pelvic floor physical therapist is invaluable and can really make the difference between fertility and infertility, right? Because we can unblock, we can release that scar tissue. But you just said that you didn't have genetically viable eggs. Was it 2 different problems?
There were a host of problems.
Okay.
So I had the endometrial tissue. There were also blood tests that revealed that my AMH and my FSH were slightly off, which people find to be the case a lot of the time. The more I have learned from fertility health experts, the more I've come to realize, and just through observing my own blood work, those things can fluctuate with your cycle. They are guideposts, right? We can use them as some sort of guide for what might be going on in the body, but we can't invest too much in them at the same time. So those were a little off. Another significant thing was I had something called elevated natural killer cells, or NK cells, which is basically when your white blood cell count is too large. It's elevated. Exactly. And what the doctor suggested could be happening is, even if I was getting pregnant, these white blood cells were attacking the embryo as if it was a virus and killing it off.
Wow.
So one of the things I learned through that was that, and again, this was starting to do my own research, and I'm not a scientist, but this is my informal understanding of how things occurred and definitely worked in my body, and what I understand from looking at other fertility health experts and what they recommend. And there is a connection between the inflammation that's associated with the elevated NK cells and diet and mindset. Absolutely, because the more stressed out you are, the more cortisol is released. Cortisol, you can develop a cortisol-rich environment in the gut, which then creates an inflammatory environment. So it's all related, and it all starts with the nervous system. It all starts with mindset. Yes. That's fascinating. You just really nailed that to a T. I mean, that is exactly what was going on. And if you think about it, I think I went into that process with that already going on. I think in some respects, I was living my life in kind of a fight or flight mode all the time. I'm a very big go-getter. I'm a very professional person. I have very high standards for myself. I always want to, be as perfect as I can at everything I do.
You're a doer.
And those are great qualities in balance, right? But there was another kind of dialogue going on inside of me that was pushing me to a point where it was having a negative impact on my body. And so again, and then furthermore, and this starts to bring me to you as well, there were, there's this sort of daily narrative that we have playing in our heads. And then there's the deeper internalized experiences that have shaped who we become, from our childhoods, from our lives. And those things also play out in how we perceive the world and how our bodies, generate different hormones.
Yes, absolutely. And there are layers and layers of that, right?
Yes.
As I'm hearing you talk, and because you're such a doer and you're so organized and you're a go-getter, and then there's this huge thing in your life that's probably the most important thing that you want to do as a person is become a parent. And that's the one thing that you really can't do. And you feel powerless because you're, many times at the mercy of doctors. And then you start thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Right.
And what can I do to fix it? Right. So you take that same, I've got to be perfect. I've got to get it done. And this is one of the things I talk about a lot with my clients. And for many of them, it's a big turning point, is that you can't go about the process of conception in a masculine way. Right. So we all have the masculine and the feminine sides of ourselves.
I love that.
Yes. And, a lot of the time, especially highly successful professional women, we have to operate in our masculine when we're at work, right? Because that's the type of side that the professional world demands, the linear, rational, logical, goal-oriented, goal execution type of approach, right? Those things are very effective. They're great. But when it comes to conception, right, that goes out the window.
Yes,
that is not. And so what we really need is to receive. I always tell my clients, you have to receive to conceive.
Oh
you have
my gosh,
get
I love that.
into the feminine. Yeah. And it's a whole state of mind that is creative. I mean, literally and figuratively, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Kathryn, when we were working together, did I recommend the book Wild Feminine by Tammy Kent?
I love that book. Yes.
I know. Everybody listening out there, please buy Wild Feminine by Tammy Kent.
Yes.
For I think a year, I had it on and we'll put that in the show notes as well. For a year, I had it on my night table. I have 10,000 books on my night table, but it's the kind of book that you could literally open to any page and it's relevant to you. It's all about the feminine and connecting to your feminine, connecting to that pelvic bowl. That book was introduced to me when I took Lynn Schulte's course, who will hopefully be a guest on my podcast. She's the founder of the Institute for Birth Healing. And I was doing a course of hers and we were talking about the masculine and the feminine, and somehow it came up that, I was having this right hip pelvic pain. And she goes, well, what happened in your life lately? I'm like, well, I recently launched my company, Pelvicore Rehab. And she's like, the right side is the masculine side. You need to, instead of giving, you need to receive. I don't know if you remember this, Lynn, if you're listening to this, but that allowed me to start the process of self-care and resolution of it. But she recommended Wild Feminine by Tammy Kent, and now I recommend it to every single client. It's an amazing book. Yes.
So that's a good transition actually to the next thing. Yeah. So so you recommended that book. I have it on my bookshelf as well. I turn to it frequently and I also recommend it to clients. So 100%. And that's really the key, because when I started realizing that what I was doing wasn't working and that I needed a different approach, I started becoming more open to that feminine side, right? And I started learning how to tune into my intuitive self and realizing that the things that I was drawn to trying, the things that felt right and good, were really guides along the way to my baby. But if I was caught up in the logical and the linear, and I'll give you an example, and this is how I came to Susan. So I had been Googling, things, ways to conceive with endometriosis and really trying to do some research in that area. And I came across Susan and what she does. And I was very interested in it, but I put it to the side because I thought, I can't spend money on that. I have to spend all this money on IVF. So I don't have anything extra, even though I was intuitively drawn to it. Couple months go by. I try the IVF fails. I'm sitting there Googling again. It pops up again, right? And then that time I said, okay, let me just look into this. And as I started to look into it, it felt really right. It really resonated with me. And I started to realize, because of that new path I was on, because I was working on mindset, because I was trusting my own knowing and combining it with research, right? It's not woo-woo stuff. It's just simply, you see something, it resonates, follow that.
Right. It's so interesting. I didn't even know. I'm learning that for the first time right now that, you had been drawn to it. I know that you had tried traditional Western medicine and that didn't work, but I will always remember our interview, when you were telling me your story on the first day that we met, and there was a certain readiness about you, Kathryn.
Yes.
You know, I have a lot of clients who come to me and, you know, I have to sort of create that. You know, I have to, it only happens if you believe it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you need to be at the point when you come to me where you are completely bought in. You know, I help clients get there, but you came to me bought in. Your intuition, I think, was so strong that I remember asking you some questions, and everything that you responded to was like, I don't know, but I'll try. I don't know, but I'll try. I'm ready. You had a readiness, like, I have an intuition about this. Let's go get this.
100%. And that really was because of all the work that I was doing on myself leading up to that point. So I also at a certain point decided to start seeing a therapist because I had things that I was realizing about my relationships, about, you know, patterns in my life that I wanted to address. And that is not something that I would have necessarily thought, oh, that will help me get pregnant. Let me go to therapy, right? But it was 100% part of the piece, because without that, and then without working with a coach on my mindset, those two things combined helped me look at thought patterns, actions that I was taking, you know, in deeply ingrained thought processes that were affecting my overall experience of things. And if this is sounding complicated for people who are overwhelming and you're thinking, oh my God, like how am I possibly going to do this? It's really one tiny baby step at a time. It's small steps lead to dramatic shifts in direction over time. And everybody's different. Everybody has a different set of circumstances that are going to impact the magical combination that works for them.
Yeah, that's so profound. It's almost like atomic habits, but for for achieving fertility. Yeah. That's what comes to mind, because it's all about tiny little changes that build on each other and then add up to a beautiful result. Kathryn, can you speak a little bit about your experience with pelvic health and what you learned during the course of your pelvic health treatment, and why you think pelvic health is so important on the fertility journey?
Well, I always tell people that working with you was the linchpin in my pregnancy. And I will, spoiler alert, kind of jump to the end of the story and then go back. So after working with Susan, after struggling for 3 years to become pregnant, working on the mindset, getting that readiness, right, really ripe, taking that step into her office and committing to working with her for a week on manually releasing the endometrial tissues that were binding my fallopian tubes and preventing healthy eggs from getting to implant, right? After working with her for that week, I became naturally pregnant in my very next cycle. And I had my healthy baby girl at 40. Yeah, and this was after having, non-genetically normal eggs. I mean, the whole thing. Right. And so to me, the whole experience was about, like you said, Susan, getting prepared in the mind to be open to that experience with you. And what we were really doing, and you can speak much better. You should probably say what we were doing.
Well, I think one thing is very important to say, and that's that we did do a lot of manual release work.
Absolutely.
But I would like to share that I remember you texted me. I was on vacation with my family, and you texted me, I'm pregnant. And we were sitting, it was a really hot day. We were sitting and resting, and I started hysterically crying. And my family was like, what the hell is going on?
Oh my God.
And I said, oh my God, my patient that I was working with is pregnant and blah, blah, blah. And in that moment, Kathryn, I promise you, my first thought was it had nothing to do with the manual work that I did. And I still maintain that, and I believe it. Yes, we released tissue. Yes, we did. But what you did was you released emotions and memories and experiences that were being held in your pelvic floor muscles that you were then ready to release. Yes, the manual work helped.
It did the releasing.
It did the releasing, but we could have, if we did the releasing without you letting go of what was so difficult and stored for so many years, the manual release would not have worked. And that's why coaching and mindset is so important, right?
Exactly.
We did work together for a week when we're doing, when we're treating anything, it's a total body approach, right?
Yeah.
So we did some craniosacral therapy because if you manipulate the sphenoid bones in the cranium, that is right above the pituitary hypothalamic ovarian junction, and that can have an effect on FSH and some fertility hormones. We did some manual work, and we also did internal pelvic floor work, right? Mm-hmm. So what we were talking about outside is that I think the missing part for you was that you were completely disconnected from your pelvic floor. You were completely disconnected from that part of your body. And it's really can be a challenging part of the body to reconnect to. So, if you feel like you have a disconnect to your biceps, let's say, or you have a pain in your biceps, you can put your hands on it, you can rub it, can even talk to it, you can look at it. Right. Your pelvic floor muscles are, for the most part, there's some external muscles stored inside of your body. And the easiest, most efficient access to those muscles is via internal work. And I think as soon as you felt that connection, that allowed you to release what was being stored.
Yes.
And it happened really relatively quickly. And that's because you allowed the process to happen.
Yes.
It was all you. I was just a vehicle to help you find a reconnection to that area.
Well, I think you're being very modest in that claim, but I understand what you're saying, which is that you need the right, in my opinion, you need the right healer. You need the right physical therapist, the right doctor, the right individual who's going to be able to recognize what's going on and help you go through the process of release, right? Yes. That's essential to healing.
Yes.
And so for me, the way I see it is, number one, I had to come to you at the exact right time and in the exact right way.
Correct.
And number two, I had to come to you, right? The exact right person at the exact right time. And three, I had to be ready to let go.
Yeah.
And again, if this is sounding overwhelming, like, well, how do I find the exact right person at the exact right time? Because if I heard me talking, a couple of years ago, I might just tune out. Like, well, what am I going to do here? And again, I really just want to emphasize there is no magic formula. The magic is inside of you.
Your intuition.
You know what it is. And my job and Susan's job, as she's pointing out, is really to work with the individual to help each woman find that exact right thing within her, right. Releasing the shame, getting over the guilt, getting over the fear, and realizing that there is hope, that there is a way to your baby. And if you're feeling it this strongly and you're listening to this podcast, you absolutely 100% are meant to be a mom.
Yes. And you're at or somewhere in the journey of your readiness, if you're listening to it, because you're interested. So many, I don't like to use the word patience, but in this particular instance, I will. We become patients in that we are so trained to listen to doctors.
Exactly.
That we forget that we have a brain of our own, and that if something doesn't resonate with us or feel right to us or is even not explained to us, we need to then do exactly what you did and continue to dig and advocate for ourselves and use our intuition and not become like robots of Western medicine,
right?
And just listen, but don't ask any questions.
Right. I mean, I am a huge fan of, data and information, and I would recommend to anyone who wants to do it, get all the blood tests, do all the things, right? And then go through it yourself and figure out what is right for you. Like what your doctor says is great advice to be considered, but it's never the end all be all. And even, the wiser IVF doctors, the wiser Western doctors, they'll acknowledge too, like there are components, this reproduction, especially, it's not just, A plus B equals C. Like there's something in there that nobody knows what it is, right?
It would be kind of nice if it was that formulaic,
it would
right?
be great.
It would make life a lot easier. I want to share another fascinating story that happened within the last year in my practice. I had the privilege of treating a dear mom. Now, she just had her second, and she was struggled with premature ovarian insufficiency, which basically means that she didn't ovulate, and it happens in women under 40, and basically means that they are essentially in menopause. She was convinced that this book called It All Starts with the Egg was going to help her get pregnant. And she did have IVF, and she did get pregnant, and she gave that, and the chances of having a pregnancy with premature ovarian insufficiency is quite low. It's a very challenging thing to deal with. And she said, Susan, I am willing to talk to anybody that wants to talk to me about infertility and premature ovarian failure and the book. I'm so passionate about it. If anybody needs connection, please give them my number. And I put that to the side. And I always, connecting and collaborating with people. Well, this sweet, sweet, sweet girl walks into my office. She's in her 30s, and she said I just want to do an evaluation. I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. She'd been through the whole infertility journal. I did a pelvic floor evaluation on her, and everything looked great. And I said, not sure that I am the one that's going to be the vehicle to help you get pregnant, but I would really like to connect you with another woman who has struggled with premature ovarian failure. So I connected them. She got pregnant within 3 months. 3 months. I'm not even sure, honestly, if she read the book. I'll put the information on the book in the show notes. But I truly believe, and I could be wrong, that connection gave her hope. I think it changed her mindset. I think it changed from catastrophization to, and it's impossible, to it's possible. So I think that is so powerful.
I absolutely agree. There's actually an interesting statistic out there I came across recently for those of us who like statistics that said women who are a part of a fertility community or who receive support, in the form of like emotional, mental support, if mental is the right word, but emotional support, psychological support, are 65% more likely to become pregnant.
It's fascinating.
If they are struggling. So women who are in the pool of those who are struggling, those who join a community, work with a coach, get emotional support, they are 65% more likely than those who don't seek out that support to become pregnant. And that is just such a testament, to what you're saying, to what I'm, over here passionately pursuing all the time, because I know that it's true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even when we talk about resolution of pain, physical pain, and infertility is physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain. But one of the most important things that we help clients with is preventing social isolation. Absolutely. Because we treat in a biopsychosocial approach. Social health is so important for overcoming challenges and pain of any kind, because when we isolate ourselves, all we're thinking about is pain, and we need to have that network and community. Right?
Absolutely. 100%. I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah. So, we always talk about building a village for our clients, Kathryn. Yeah. Who would you put in your village that you could pull from for your clients? We always talk about that we use an individualized approach. There are no two people that are different. And the thing that the thing we have in common also is that there's nothing cookie cutter about what we do.
Right.
There's no recipe. We look at the person in front of them and give them what we need. That being said, we do have those peripheral resources that we very commonly pull from. Can you tell us a little bit about who would be in your back pocket to pull from?
Yes. So I definitely want to address that. And then I also want to give the caveat, which I'll go to in a minute. So I'm going to tell you that. And then I want to talk about a client success story that I had.
Please.
Okay. So first of all, I think in my ideal fertility village, right? And I love that you talked about the biopsychosocial aspect of things, because I think that's a perfect framework to think about who your fertility team is, right? Who's your bump squad? Who are the people that are going to have your back and meet your needs throughout this process, right? So the first person I'm going to put on there, right? Mindset coach. Second person.
Amen.
Right? Exactly. That's where it starts, right? We're going to start with the mind and let it lead into all the other directions that you realize you need to go. And one of those places would absolutely 100% to be get a pelvic health exam, right? See someone like Susan herself, and learn about what could be, might or might not be going on in that area, right? Also nutrition. A lot of people talk about the value of nutrition. And I know that when it comes to the fertility journey, people can get overwhelmed with the idea of having to change my diet, above all other things. So again, I always say, start with the mindset. In my perfect fertility world, if someone's open to everything, I'm also going to recommend get a fertility diet, right? Find someone who can help you develop that fertility diet. Acupuncture. Again, I've talked to many acupuncturists who say acupuncture is so valuable for fertility. And once someone's perfectly aligned, they still might not be getting pregnant if they don't have the right mindset, or if, there's aspects of their pelvic health that are off. So all of these things, they're intertwined and they work together. And that's why it's so valuable to have a team, or a bump squad, as I like to call it, right? To help you, maximize your potential.
Right. And when we were talking, Kathryn, you said that it could be very overwhelming for people to think that they may need more than one person. But
absolutely, I
think to have someone like you, where they start with the mindset, because it all does, your brain believes the story that you tell it. Yes. Right. So we need to tell our brain a positive story. And then once you do that and you start flipping the story in your head, then you naturally become open to more positive changes, or more positive choices or decisions like diet. It doesn't seem so laborious anymore or choreful. Right. But the nice thing about working with you is that they don't have to have that whole team or village at once. They can start with you, and they don't then have to do the digging and the groundwork to try to find someone. You have all of those people in your back pocket to recommend to them, so that you're like literally quarterbacking their care. Right?
I like that.
That's what you're doing. You're quarterbacking their care.
Yes.
They come to you, they worry about them, they don't worry, but they work on the mindset, and then it becomes a lot less stressful. It becomes a lot less daunting.
Yes. And I want to give you, now I have 3 examples running through my mind. I'm like, okay, which one do I pick? So the first one is, I know for myself, right? I like yoga. I like Pilates, but I don't really like running. I thought I didn't really like cardio. I didn't want to do any of that kind of stuff. But when I reached a certain point with having no genetically normal eggs after 2 rounds of IVF, I felt so, I felt very defeated. I felt just absolutely, there were times where I was just crying on my kitchen floor, like just howling to the universe, like, when will this end? When will this be over? Right. And I finally reached a point where I said, I'll do anything. And that led me to do the 2 things that I had been resisting the most, which was shifting my diet. I started working with a brilliant nutritionist who specializes in fertility. And he suggested I do things that I was like, I could never do that. Like, give up sugar, give up gluten. And I'm not telling you to go do this, but I am saying this was my experience. I realized that was the only thing I hadn't tried, and I was willing to do anything. So that was the next thing I was going to do. And because I was in the state of mind where I believed I was going to become a mom, I believed that I was on the path to becoming pregnant, I was not going to entertain the option that it wouldn't happen. Doesn't mean I wasn't scared. Doesn't mean I didn't feel overwhelmed at times, but it meant I wasn't indulging those feelings. I was focusing on what I knew in my heart to be true. And in that case, I actually found that I liked making those changes. Not that they were easy, right? But that they felt so good in my body. And I remember I was also recommended to do HIIT, which is the high intensity interval training. Yeah. Yes. And I worked with a trainer who again specialized in fertility. And there was this one moment I remember where he had me like stepping up on a bench, and you had to step up on the bench and down on the bench and up on the bench and down on the bench really fast and go fast, faster. And I'm like, oh my God, and I'm sweating and I'm sweating. And I remember inside my head, I started saying, I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to be a mom. And I believed it in my heart. And I knew like, that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. I'm not giving up. I'm going to do this. And at the end of the exercise, he looked at me and he goes, at some point, something happened and you hysterical. Nailing it. Like you were in the exercise, you know?
It's like you channeled your endorphins toward fertility.
Yes. Instead of saying, oh my God, I'm going to give up.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the power of mindset. That's why it's so important, because if I went to that exercise, like, God darn it, why do I have to do this? Literally my body would not be able to even maximize the benefits of that exercise.
I love that. I think that might be my favorite thing that you said today. I don't know. I thought that was great. That was really, really great. Oh my God, Kathryn, there's so much more to talk about. I really would like you to tell our listeners about a really exciting podcast that's coming up, because this is the beginning of the conversation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Please tell our listeners what's coming up for them.
Okay. So one thing that I'm really excited about that I have started working on is we've created a podcast called Badass Fertility. And this is a podcast that is dedicated to cultivating a community of women who can find support, solace, hope, and inspiration weekly by tuning in to me and our community. We're going to have guests like Susan, who are experts in various aspects of fertility. We're going to hear from some of my clients who have worked with me and become moms. So they've had successful pregnancies after working with me. We're going to meet every week really just to learn how to release the fear, stop living in shame, stop living in doubt and negativity and self-loathing, and really start to feel empowered, confident, and completely capable in knowing that you're going to become a mom.
That's amazing. Thank you. I personally can't wait. I think it's going to be amazing. Before we go off, and I could talk to you for hours,
I know.
3 takeaways. Or 2 takeaways? Or the number 1 takeaway? Because we've talked about so many things. Obviously, I'll put number 1 on the list. How's that? It all starts with mindset.
Yes. And I'm going to build from that. You said in the beginning, before we started recording, you said mindset is the pool that leads to many rivers.
Yes.
And I think so that's point number 1. Point number 2 is it's also the most overlooked ingredient on this journey, right? It's because our culture, we don't tend to think of the mind-body connection as this as serious, as it really is, as real as it really is.
Being of one thing.
Right, exactly. As being of one thing. And so if you are struggling on the fertility journey, it's absolutely indispensable to work on mindset. And it is the pool that leads to many rivers.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. Kathryn, we're going to let all of our guests know where they could find you. Quickly tell us where we're going to direct them to so they could find you just listening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You can find me at my website, badassfertility.com. You can find me on Instagram, Kathryn_badassfertility. That's Kathryn. I'm sure the link will be in the notes.
Yes.
So those are the 2 best places to go.
Okay, great. And we'll have all of that in the show notes. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Your Pelvic Health Podcast, where we bring you the real lowdown on pelvic health. Please reach out to us at www.pelvicorerehab.com. You could find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your shows. Please follow, and leave leave a 5-star review. That allows us to continue to bring you all of the great information that you want. And always keep in mind that you need to be your own best advocate and that healing requires a total body approach.